Feral tomato, feral tomato, feral tomato. Feral tomato, marching over the land. Om pa 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 pa, om pa 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 pa, om pa 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 pa, om pa pa pa, om pa 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 pa pa. Having passed through the intestines of the local vegetarian hillbilly, the seeds of this wild feral tomato, having passed through the rustic, picturesque, hillbilly dry composting toilets collection bucket with 15 litres of turds and ashes from the fire mixed in with 5 or 10 litres of water, stirred into a pourable slurry and gravity emplaced into a rabbit burrow. And this particular rabbit burrow, in the most auspicious of circumstances, was in the hole in the ground left by the root ball of a sizable yellow box tree. So there's presumably a water source down there, otherwise the tree would not have grown. So you get human sewage, which tends to be acid, buffered with ashes from the fire, which tends to be alkaline, mixed with charcoal, which is good at absorbing complex chemicals in its matrix, including water, and all that goes down the hole. So this is the best wild feral tomato, but it didn't get there by itself. But on the other hand, it shows only minimal evidence of having been grazed by the local wildlife, in contradistinction to several otherwise large plants, which have also produced fruit this season. However, perhaps the most remarkable feature about this is that it allows us to make a direct comparison between a human-assisted tomato, like this one, which for some reason the wallabies have so far left alone, and it's got perfect starting conditions, and it's got an underground source of water. And this little tomato, which the seed has come from one which has been picked up, presumably eaten by a bird, perhaps a wallaby, but I don't know whether a seed would survive going through a wallaby. And this one here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, call it 8 metres. Closer. To the hut. So clearly, having a good start in a protected location matters a lot. What I find interesting is that there are self-sown tomato plants growing, and in the case of this one, surviving pretty well until some idiot came along with a whippersnipper and knocked the top off it. And these little stunted, overgrazed, water-starved, feral baby tomatoes. They appear to me, at any rate, to be probably not come from small pieces of tomato that animals have picked up and carried here and dropped. I'm thinking that this has come out in the turds of the birds. And that's how come it gets to be here. Grown in the rocks, competing with the wild native parsnip. Sometimes growing in unlikely spots, but these ones here, close to the hut, pretty sure they have come from tomatoes. Which have done their time uneaten. So if I haven't eaten them by the time I buy new tomatoes, the old tomatoes, they wind up being shared with the critters. And it's a funny thing, but when you're standing there and you're throwing a soggy tomato or a zucchini or a carrot, that's pretty much where it lands, there where those are grown. They are directly suited by me throwing it out, animals eating the old vegetable and leaving some of the seeds in situ on site. Whereas, if we come over here, this is a self-sown tomato, and there's another one. Here's another one, and it actually has both flowers and fruit, whereas that one's nearly dead. Now, I haven't thrown tomatoes over here. These have come in the turds of the birds. Here we have the queen of the self-sown feral tomato brigade. Despite having been heavily grazed, growing on a rock, apparently dropped there in a bit of bird shit, perhaps wallaby turds. This particular tomato plant has nearly finished 2 tomatoes to the point where their seeds might well be viable. Don't know. We'll see how that one goes. So that, get my shadow out of the way, that's the ranking champion in self-sown tomatoes. And over here we have the runner-up in the poured down a rabbit hole variety. It's also been heavily grazed. Something's had a bite. I'd say that's a swamp wallaby. Had a bite on the tomato plant and found that it was unpalatable. I say that because you've got bottom jaw and top jaw. Yeah, making sense? So yeah, that's the runner-up in the composting toilet sown feral tomatoes. That's the winner of the self-sown division. Well, here we have the overall grand champion of the feral tomato research and development project. Ain't it a big one, then? I think the committee agrees that we can come up with a consolation prize for the furthest flung uphill self-sown feral tomato. What a sterling effort. Honourable mention. Must do better. Well played. And while that concludes the demonstration of wild feral tomatoes colonising uphill of the release point, it now becomes time the furthest flung downhill tomato on the entire endangered species sanctuary. Beside the driveway at the front gate. Not actually the picture of health, but not dead yet either. And that little feral tomato, its seed has been washed down the driveway during the rains, following the apparent finish of the drought. Remains lurking a mere 3.5 inches below the surface. But anyway, that one lonely downhill tomato, it's come about at the end of the drought from seeds that have been thrown around here in the cut off top and bottom ends of tomatoes, or maybe, perhaps, when my eyes was bigger than my belly was, and I've thrown half a tomato sandwich out here onto the lawn. But yep, it's washed away and fetched up at the gate. And to date, it is the only wild feral tomato to have migrated downhill from the point of release, so to speak. So consider it anecdotal with a statistical universe of 1, but it is my considered opinion that self-sown wild feral tomatoes migrate uphill. And this does not disprove the hypothesis, because this is not self-sown. This has come out of the second time that I filled in the rabbit burrow underneath the termite mound in the hollow log. However, in the interest of honesty and not skewing the results in favour of confirmation bias, allow me to say that over here, what we can see is a self-sown tomato plant, feral, which is as far downhill from the original point of release of most of the feral tomatoes as the one at the front gate. But it's entirely possible that the feral tomato plant at my feet has arisen from a seed off a tomato plant that's grown in that there rabbit burrow. But I'm going to consider that to be the exception, which proves the rule, because if it is, in fact, a daughter plant of the one in the rabbit burrow, then it's not downhill. It's on the same level. So the hypothesis is not entirely. In need of being shit canned. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.